Welcome to the Edelheit Experience, a compelling conversation about revolutionizing health and well-being, bringing you rich stories and lessons learned from leading corporate executives. Now, we'd like to introduce your host, Jonathan Edelheit.
Welcome to the Edelheit Experience. This is Jonathan Edelheit. Today, I have two guests with me, Natalie and Rebecca. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Jonathan. We're happy to be here.
Thanks, Jonathan.
So it would be great if Natalie and Rebecca, you could introduce yourselves.
Sure, I'll go first, Jonathan. This is Natalie Johnson, and I'm one of the two co-founders of ViDL Solutions. And my real role within our consulting firm is really focusing on bigger picture strategy. I do a lot of coaching, facilitating, and consulting. And my background is in human performance. I originally started working more in traditional wellness and sport performance, and over the years have transitioned over to supporting really organizations all over the world. And so I'm the CVO of our consulting firm, and then I'll hand it over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Natalie. My name is Rebecca. My last name is also Johnson. So Natalie and I are business partners and we share the same last name, but we are not related. And I am our organization's chief integrator, which means while Natalie is busy thinking about big picture stuff and strategy and growth, I'm often kind of mired in the details and overseeing our daily operations. My background is actually in mental health counseling. I worked for a few years as a therapist early in my career, spent the middle part of my career in the corporate wellness market, and then have spent the last decade or so focusing on teams and leadership and culture.
How often do both of you get asked the question if you're related?
A lot. We try and head it off at the beginning though and say we're not related. We know we have the same last name.
So I guess it's the universe who brought you both together with the same last name.
Yeah, or a marriage.
Or a marriage.
I married into it.
The other thing that happens, Jonathan, is that people confuse us. So many times we'll be working with a client for, weeks, and they'll call Natalie Rebecca and me Natalie. So we're often straightening out things related to our names a lot.
Very interesting. So,
Yep.
So what does ViDL Solutions do?
So this is Natalie again, and we are an organizational well-being consulting firm. And so we really look at well-being from the lens of the whole organization. And so when we talk about organizational well-being, we really look at three different components. The first component is people, the individual well-being of people, really looking at the physical, emotional, mental, and even spiritual well-being of the individual people within organizations. The second component of organizational well-being is team performance. And that's really looking more at relationships and people's ability to communicate with each other. Does trust exist on teams? Are people able to have really engaging yet tough conversations with each other? And does psychological safety exist? And then the third component of organizational well-being is courageous leadership. So whether you are in a formal leadership role or not, how can we begin to lead at work and in life in a way that creates true connection with each other instead of what we call the old school lead over with command and control? And so our clients can vary by quite a lot. Some clients, we work with them long-term on overall organizational well-being, and we work in all three areas, whereas other clients, we discover that it's best to work ideally in one space. So for example, we might work with some clients strictly on team performance because we were able to discover that their real gap in creating a healthier culture is that they need to create higher performing teams through better communication, through creating better trust, and some of the things that we mentioned. So our clients can vary by quite a lot. It can be as little as a one and done where we come and do a keynote at their annual meeting, or it can be a multi-year project where we're really helping them with all three.
And you determine that based upon your conversations with them about what they kind of, where that need is or that gap?
Yeah, and that can look two different ways. Oftentimes we'll have clients that came to us by word of mouth or were introduced to us in one way, and they have something very specific in mind that they want. So an example might be we offer a couple different leadership training and consulting options. One is Dare to Lead, which is based on the work of Brene Brown, or developing a leadership mindset. So some of our clients might come to us and say, we want Dare to Lead, or we want developing leadership mindset. And that's what we work with them on. Where other clients, and maybe even more often, they'll come to us and say things like, gosh, we're just noticing our turnover rate is really high, or people are burning out, or we're struggling with managing this new hybrid workforce, and we just want to create a healthier culture. And then we dive into what we call as a discovery phase, where we dig into conversations directly with the employees and identify where are there bigger gaps, where would be a good place to start, and what would, say, a 2 to 3 year strategic plan look like if we were able to help them with all those issues and also help them to function more at full capacity.
How often do you go in where the client says, I have a need here, but you actually see that the need is in a different area?
I'm going to let Rebecca answer that.
Oh, that's such a good question because it happens very often. Many times what we find is that the problem that the client comes to us with, or the problem they think they're having, or the challenge they need to address isn't really the challenge they need to address. And Jonathan, maybe the best way for me to answer that is to give you an example of the type of conversation that happens a lot. Could I do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So one conversation that comes to mind happened a couple of years ago, and we were talking with a woman who was the head of HR at a fairly large healthcare organization. And she had reached out to us sort of under the guise of, we've put a lot of work into our well-being initiative, but it doesn't seem to be having the impact we hoped it would. People aren't engaging in it. Maybe we need to rebrand the program or make it more attractive. Maybe we need to communicate about it better. Or maybe we even need to add some cool new programs and services so people use the well-being program and it has more of an impact. And so her thought coming into the call was, that's what I need your help on. And what we did in that conversation is what we do in all conversations where we're meeting with someone new for the first time, is we kind of have them zoom out. And so one of us asked her something like, tell me a little bit more about before we start talking about the well-being program, tell me a little bit more about your organization. How would you describe the culture? What's been going on? What's the relationship like between leaders and teams? What's the day-to-day working experience? And I remember that when we asked her that question, there was kind of this long pause and then a big sigh. And then she talked at length about what was really going on in the organization. And she said things like, we've just been through a merger that hasn't actually been handled that well. So it's left a lot of uncertainty and disruption. We've got a lot of leaders who are overwhelmed or underskilled. We're a healthcare organization, so we've got staffing issues and we're dealing with overwork and burnout, high turnover, and we can't even seem to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so when she said that to us, our immediate internal reaction was, the thing you don't really need to be thinking about right now is how to make a better, flashier well-being program. Really, the challenges that you're having in the organization are much more systemic, and they have to do with things like, skilling up your leaders, transforming your culture, ensuring there's trust and communication, getting processes aligned. And so we ended up having a conversation with her around that helped her see that while you're welcome to invest dollars in a well-being program to make it flashier and more attractive, really what you need to do is to start figuring out a plan for attending to those systemic issues, because those are having an impact on the well-being and performance of your people way more than any well-being program could. So that type of thing happens all the time. And it's one of the reasons why oftentimes people come to us through the avenue of well-being, thinking that what they need is help around their formal well-being program. And we often end up working with them on things like team performance and leadership and culture, because usually that's where the root issues are and where they'll have the most return on their investment.
That's, I think that's fascinating because I feel like a lot of employers are look at, kind of what you're saying is like, oh, where's the shiny new object or really cool thing that I can roll out just to check a box or solve a problem, mental health solution or, a different point solution, or let me just host a workshop and all my problems will go away. When in reality, they really need to be thinking differently.
Yeah, no, and that actually reminds me, I don't know if you've seen this video, it's gone viral, but have you seen the video about it's like a 2-minute little clip about this HR manager who's getting all excited with employees about like this, we recognize that mental and emotional well-being are at risk here, and we really care about that. And so we've got some solutions in place, and let me tell you what we're going to do. And one employee asks, are you going to hire some more people so we're all not working so much? And she says, nope. And another person asks, are you going to help us, figure out these inefficient processes and make things smoother? And she says, nope. She says, what I am going to do is I'm going to have a mental health lunch and learn. And someone says, I don't know, is it okay if we take it on paid work time? And she says, nope. So the point is that I think that's what happens a lot, is that organizations have good intentions about attending to the mental and emotional well-being of their people, but they don't recognize that you really can't improve those things through check the box programs. There's larger and harder work that has to be done.
That's really interesting. We just did a mental health webinar with about 400 people with Lyra about a week ago. And, someone in the chat had said, they made a comment regarding that of like the fact that, people are overworked, they're stressed out, they're busier than ever. How are we going to address that versus, just, here's a new solution for you. And I feel, and everyone I talk to is over the last 2.5 years, things have only gotten busier with less free time than before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that is kind of where we end up spending a lot of our time, is helping employers uncover what are the root cause issues. And it's very rarely do we end up that what they need is, a Fitbit or more diet trackers or lunch and learns. What they really need to do is attend to things like, are we cultivating a humanistic culture? Are our teams able to work well together? And as Natalie said, have hard conversations? Are the people in leadership roles, are they being skilled up to handle the hard job of leadership? What's the climate like? That's really those things we have found when an organization invests in that type of work, they organically improve the well-being of their employees much more than most traditional wellness programs can do, for sure.
So I'm assuming there's a lot of waste out there. And, it sounds like you're talking a little bit about where we're maybe wasting time and money. I don't know if there's other examples you want to give of that, but I'm also curious as to where should we be spending our money? What should we be actually doing organizationally?
Well, yeah, I'll take a first stab at that. And then Natalie, I'm sure you'll have things to add here. The three things that come to mind, maybe the traditional wellness things that I would say are the biggest waste of money. And they oftentimes consume a lot of money that organizations could be investing elsewhere, are things like health risk assessments, biometric screenings, especially the biometric screenings that happen every year and that usually mean that you're paying for employees to have screenings annually that they really don't need to be having annually, and that doesn't even really align with medical guidelines. And then the complicated financial incentive programs that are incentivizing people for certain outcomes or participation in a long series of events over the course of the year. Those things have been proven, I would say, time and time again, to not give a very good return on investment. So those are the three that I often point out as kind of low-hanging fruit to remove your investment from there. And then there's lots of other ways that organizations can invest their money. I'll just offer one of them and then I'll turn it over to you, Nat. But there's a lot of value in making coaching available to your employees through highly skilled, intrinsically trained coaches. so that employees can work one-on-one with highly skilled coaches where they can work through whatever issues are important to them at the time, which usually is some combination of, individual personal well-being and professional challenges. That is one of the greatest ways to help your employees really flourish. And we often encourage organizations to take money that's invested in HRAs and screenings and incentives and to put it towards a variety of services, but one of them is coaching. Natalie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I will add that I think relates a lot to everything we've talked about is what will commonly happen when we're speaking to different clients, Jonathan, is that they think they know what they need. And so many times it's we need healthier employees, we need better well-being programs. But other times, even as we start getting into the conversation with them, they will say things in general like high turnover rate, they're experiencing burnout, we would like to keep our employees longer. And they kind of in some ways guess at what that solution might look like. So even with us talking about, it sounds like you might need some training, some coaching on team performance. It sounds like you might need to skill up your leaders. What a lot of employers fail to do is really communicate directly with their employees. And I think it's a difficult thing to do, to go directly to your employees in the form of one-on-one conversations or focus groups or questionnaires and ask them some really honest questions. Like, what is the real thing that gets in the way of you showing up as the best version of yourself every day? And so sometimes what we run into with our clients is they say, well, we have these engagement surveys and we have our claims data. And so we know we need to focus on this area, but they've failed to really invest any time or energy in really talking to their employees. And that's difficult because it can be looked at, well, why is my employer asking me these questions? And they could be afraid to speak up, especially if they're struggling. And so where we feel we've really been able to make a difference is come in and provide a process of discovery. And that can look different with different clients, but we really talk directly to the employees themselves while still incorporating things like claims data and engagement surveys, but ask them those tough questions that this is a confidential conversation. We're looking for themes of what's getting in the way at all levels of the organization of people showing up as the best version of themselves. And so although the employer themselves, they have a sense for what's going on, they don't really have all the information until you really begin talking to the employees. And so I think that's another place where employers could really invest, not just financially, but really invest some time and energy into learning more about what's really standing in the way for their employees.
Jonathan, can I add, that is such a good point, Natalie, and it reminds me of this quote that I keep circulating in my head recently in our work, and it's attributed to Albert Einstein, and he said something like, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And the reason that quote is important for me is because it highlights the fact that we have to really understand what actual challenges we are trying to solve for. And once we understand the real challenges, we're going to waste a lot less time and money at kind of whack-a-mole solutions here and there. So we do, as Natalie mentioned, we have a pretty solid process when we're working with a new client, unless they are kind of 100% certain about what they want. If they come to us with just a set of problems and challenges, we have a process where we take people through discovery and we learn together, us and the client, what's at the heart of the challenges they really need to solve. And then we can help them customize a solution that almost always involves some sort of training for individuals, teams, and leaders, some sort of follow-up coaching, and then a sustainability plan to make sure that people can make good use of the work after we're gone.
A question I have for you is, do you have organizations who just think about, well, it's a lot to individually coach each person and we can't change behaviors. Like there may be employees that are unhelpful, like there's some that this could have a huge impact for, but there's maybe some that it's a complete waste of time, and they don't necessarily see the value. What would you say to, those companies that aren't doing that deep dive on an individual basis of like, why it's not a waste, what the outcomes will be and the benefits.
I guess I would kind of harken back to that last idea I suggested, which is that if we don't know, and I want to say in large organizations where there's thousands and thousands of employees, we would not suggest that we're going to try to talk to every single one of them. In that case, we would do a well thought out survey. We would do some focus groups. And we also recognize that we're in any organization, we're not going to be able to help every single person, positively improve their life or their well-being or their, professional role. That just, you can never, influence 100% of the population. But one of the things I would say to an organization that's asking, why bother spending the time and money talking to lots of employees, it's because, as Natalie said, until you have the real information and as much of the truth as you can get, and you really understand the problem, then a lot of the solutions you're going to employ aren't going to be useful because they are not attending to what's really at the heart of the matter. Did that answer your question, Jonathan, or were you
I think
asking
it did. I think,
okay.
Yep, that was, I think that's, it's kind of hit the nail on the head of why that is so important, because otherwise you could be building all these things within your company and none of it can be aligned with the actual needs of what people want.
Yeah. And you
and
waste
also,
time and money and energy. And then you're, literally organizations invest in programs that are tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars and go on for months or years that aren't actually addressing what really needs to be addressed. So it ends up really just being wasteful and frustrating, I think.
So then it's really complex but simple. The first thing companies should do is do that deep dive with the individuals on their team and find out what's really going on and what they need to actually be doing, like, what their employees actually need or want. And they should be kind of building up from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And what we found, I guess, back to Natalie's introduction, what we found is that the work kind of usually lands in one, two, or three of three categories: individual well-being, team performance, or courageous leadership. And we kind of roll that whole thing under the idea of helping the organization function at full capacity by helping individuals function at full capacity through a focus on their own personal energy and well-being, by helping teams function at full capacity, and by helping leaders function at full capacity. So that's the other thing, is that because this whole process can seem sort of overwhelming and daunting for employers, our process helps them see we start with discovery, we move to a customized solution, and usually that solution will suggest that you attend to one, two, or three of these three areas.
And I know with myself, for example, like I don't see the problems with myself, and it's easier when another person comes in and sees them or is able to help guide me, to what I need to do differently. Or do you find, like, what do you find when you're going in and meeting with these employees individually in what they, their own issues and how you're helping them work through that?
Well, I think when we're in training sessions and in individual coaching sessions, and even when we're consulting with leaders, you always run into people who get it, want it, and can do it. That the concepts they're learning and training coaching around self-awareness and effective thinking and mindset and emotional regulation and leadership and communication and all that stuff we talk about, there's always a really solid percentage of employees that you can just feel as you're talking with them. They get it. This is resonating. It's giving them the tools and the language they need. You can tell they're going to go back to their teams and use it. And that's, super, super rewarding for us. And then there's always going to be a percentage of people who just aren't at the point in their own lives or personal or professional development, for whom maybe the concepts land and they make sense, but they're not able to use them, or maybe they're just kind of close to the ideas and it doesn't seem meaningful and relevant. I would say that's usually a very small percentage of the population of people we work with, because the concepts that we talk about in our training and coaching are kind of fundamental and basic, and they seem to resonate with a lot of people. But I would say most people we work with get it, want it, and end up using it in their lives in a really profound way. And then there's some people who just don't, but we are clear that we, can impact everybody. Natalie, anything you want to add to that?
One thing that's coming up for me that comes back to Jonathan's question about there's just some people that are not going to be open to the coaching, or we just won't have the capacity to coach people and help them. But also comes back to, how can you go in and have an individual conversation with everybody in a company? And so our clients are anywhere from a small company of 50 to, several 100,000 employees. And so, one thing that I think is important to point out is that, yes, it's great to start somewhere and have individual conversations or focus groups, but we also offer, things like confidential assessments to give us a better idea. And the goal isn't that we're going to dive in and everyone's going to be receptive to what we're doing. The goal really is to skill them up, skill the employees up, skill the leaders up and the teams up so that they're able to better manage and they're able to better identify when a culture starts to feel toxic, or better yet, and this is something that's come up recently with a couple of our clients. We've been working with a couple clients for a few years. And what happens is those people that initially they said, well, this set of people are not going to really be open to coaching and having these one-on-one conversations. What they discover in working with us is that, wow, what we realize is this position or this person just really isn't a good fit for us or good fit in this capacity. We need to move them, or their eyes become open to where the toxicity is coming from. And now they are skilled up to be able to manage that. They're now skilled up to be able to have those tough conversations. And instead of what typically happens is people kind of tolerate behaviors that are unacceptable, or if someone won't speak up, or it's a leader and people aren't sure what to do. Over time, the other leaders and the employees are now skilled up. They are able to recognize when behaviors are unacceptable or when something is contributing negatively to the culture, and they know what to do, whether that's coaching them, out into a different position, or being able to support them in leaving the company and finding something that's a better match. They're able to be empowered to recognize it and do it themselves. And so with these really large companies that we work with, it certainly takes time, but it's not one-on-one conversations with everyone. We just begin skilling people up over time to be able to do it on their own and sustain their own practices.
That's very interesting, because it's important. If you have toxicity, you got to get it out, because it spreads, whether within the company or without. I was just talking to one of our partners, and they did business with this other company quite closely. And that other company had a toxic senior executive. And because of that one executive, they're no longer doing business with that company. And that company was kind of, I think, tolerating that person because they were producing. And I wonder how many companies realize the impact internally, externally, of how it really impacts the culture or the relationships with clients.
That is a really, really, really important point. And one of the things that comes up for us as a root cause issue a lot is that there are people who are being allowed to stay in roles, often in leadership roles, but sometimes, levels, all employee levels, they're being allowed to stay in roles that have a deep impact on other people. And they're behaving in ways that are creating toxicity, that are shutting down psychological safety, that are creating stress and burnout for other people. And sometimes they've been allowed to stay in those roles because, to your point, they're producing, quote unquote. Maybe it's a VP of sales who's, just bringing in a ton of revenue for the company. And what our work with organizations often does is it helps other leaders see that whatever this person is producing is not worth the toxicity they're creating. And so we're going to have to do something about this person. We're going to have to create some accountability and be clear on what's okay and not okay. And if they can't show up in alignment with the culture we want to create, they have to be removed from the organization. And the other reason that people we are finding are often allowed to stay in roles, even though they're creating drama and toxicity, sometimes it's not because they're producing. It's just because nobody, to Natalie's point, has the skill, competence, confidence, courage to have very hard conversations. And so I was thinking about writing an article on this because I think so much of what we do in the workplace that isn't helpful or productive and that really negatively impacts well-being comes down to one thing. And that one thing is the inability or unwillingness to have hard conversations productively, particularly around when we have underperforming employees or, toxic employees. And when an organization is able to skill themselves up so they can have hard conversations productively, that one thing alone improves individual well-being, performance more than literally almost anything else. I mean, it's such a gem, and it's the thing that most organizations struggle most with, and really honestly sometimes keeps teams and organizations stuck.
Well, and oftentimes I think it comes to us. In other words, our clients will come to us, and that's so true what Rebecca said. We say that all the time. It all comes back to hard conversations. But oftentimes our clients will come to us and they're not looking to have a hard conversation with that person or the team. What they're looking to do instead is help them. And so they're trying to support them with training or support them with coaching or support them in managing their team. And then once we get in, we discover, oh gosh, maybe we can help them, but what really bubbles to the surface is a lot of what's happening with this team is this one person who isn't able to have tough conversation, who is, more command and control and leadership. But what the company has done instead of having that hard conversation is they want to support them, which is admirable that they want to support them first. But oftentimes it's to the point of they've been supporting them and trying to support them for years, and it's been detrimental to the team and the company.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so this is such an interesting point because they've been kind of aiding and abetting for a long time. And I am learning that sometimes people will come to us for help around team performance or courageous leadership, and they have one or two people in mind that they really want to target, and they're hoping that the training and coaching will help these one or two toxic people really change. And many times it does. Many times, people who are underperforming realize through training and coaching, they develop more self-awareness and they begin to think effectively, and they're able to change their own behaviors in a really positive way. But I think the important part there about what Natalie said is that oftentimes training and coaching is so valuable for literally any team and any person in any organization. But the thing that's missing is if the training and coaching is not supported by the hard conversations internally and holding people accountable, then the impact of the training and coaching can only go so far.
I want to jump back to something I think is important to this, because I feel, we talked about incentives earlier. There was a huge school district I was talking to a couple of weeks ago on a roundtable with a bunch of employers, and they mentioned how they want to get rid of incentives that they don't work. So they clearly agreed with both of you, and that we could spend and allocate money wiser. But that executive leadership really hasn't gotten the message that incentives don't work. So it's tough for them to actually kind of change that. And also there's a whole entrenched system that's built around incentives in this space. A lot of vendors, point solutions, that has built up their business model based on incentives. And I feel that if we kind of got that out, there would be all this cash that could be reallocated to more meaningful programs like you're talking about. And I was just curious, where you think we stand in the incentive conversation, and how do you have those conversations or change people's philosophies so budgets are more available to more meaningful programs?
There is a little bit of stuckness around incentives, I would say, because I think the research has been pretty clear for many, many years at this point that incentive programs aren't doing what they were designed to do. They don't lead to people sustainably changing their behavior, and they don't really lead to any return on investment for the company. But because there's such a paradigm that's been established around incentives and corporate wellness in general, the thing we have to remember is that paradigms are really hard to change. And so I think there is more and more awareness and understanding and acceptance about the fact that incentives don't work the way that they were designed to, but there's still a lot of stuckness. I think we're in a much better place than we were 5 years ago. I think more and more of the companies we work with have already tried a complicated incentive program and then realized on their own, this is time consuming, it's really expensive, it's a lot of energy, and it's making employees angry, and it doesn't seem to be doing what we wanted it to do. So I think we're getting there, and we keep having to have conversations like this. But I think also many times executive leaders can be sold on the idea that incentives don't work through a combination of, one, the right information. So if we can present the data to executive leaders, and there's a lot of it that exists that shows them that this is actually a waste of money for the company. That is, an important point for many executive leaders. It's a waste of money. It is definitely not leading to employee satisfaction, and it's probably leading to employee dissatisfaction. We're not getting the outcomes we want. So number one is just making sure that executive leaders are presented with the facts, the science on incentives. And then number two, I think it can be helpful because if we have a deeply entrenched incentive program, many leaders might sort of think, maybe we should change that, but that's going to be really complicated. It means we're going to have to remove things that people are used to. And so if you're presenting to executive leaders, I think you also need to have kind of a plan in place for a phased removal of the incentive plan. Phase one, we remove this and add this in. Phase two, we remove that and add that in. So I think it's a matter of information, making sure the information you're presenting speaks to what's most important to executive leaders, and then having kind of a phased progressive plan ready for how you would get out of incentives and how much money that would free up for other more important investments.
Now, a question I have for you is that when companies bring you in, is it coming out of like the wellness budget? Is it coming out of the training budget? If someone's listening to this, and maybe they don't even have a budget allocated, like where can this come from, or what suggestions do you have for them?
Yeah, it can come from, so the work we do, I'll just answer the first part. The work we do with clients comes from all sorts of different budgets. Oftentimes it is an L&D initiative. Sometimes it's a learning and develop initiative, and it comes out of the organization's L&D budget. Many times the people who originally contact us are decision makers in organizations who have teams or a set of leaders, and they know they need training and coaching. And in that case, it might come out of that team or that leader's budget. Sometimes it comes out of the well-being budget if they connect with us kind of through the well-being avenue. Natalie, is there another way that you want to answer that question in terms of how organizations kind of finance this work?
It's a complicated question because it feels to me like it's the same question of who's the best person within the organization to work with, because it really depends on how we've been introduced to the company. And I would say probably more times than not, we're contacted by someone perhaps in the C-suite or someone with who's able to manage and control some budgets. And that can be one avenue. And then they later introduce us to HR. And ideally, we would love to partner with the health and well-being and any kind of other programs that they have, because we don't want to be siloed through one area. But it depends, because sometimes it's the L&D people, sometimes it's the Rebecca and I have thought about this many times. Like, if we're really going to target a person within an organization, or we want to have conversations with specific people in organizations, who would that be? And it really depends on the structure. It depends on the mindset of the person and where they are. But from a budgetary standpoint, I would say more often than not, it's coming out of training and development.
As we wrap things up, any final words of wisdom you'd like to share?
Jonathan, there was one thing that I was thinking about mentioning, and it's a phrase that I want to bring into the conversation only because it seems to resonate with people. And it actually stemmed from that conversation I was recapping for you early on when we were talking to the VP of HR at healthcare, and she was thinking about her well-being program. And then through the conversation, we realized, oh, we have some systemic issues that need attention first. And the phrase is an organization's hierarchy of needs. So one way to think about the work we do and what's really important for organizations to consider is, well, let me back up a little bit. You, Jonathan, you probably remember in high school or college learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the individual. Do you remember learning about that whole thing?
I do.
Yeah, okay. And so it's this idea that as an individual, we can't really, quote unquote, fulfill our potential. That's kind of at the top of the pyramid until we have more basic needs met. And I remember in that conversation with the VP of HR that I was recapping earlier, after she told us what was going on with her organizations, the first thing that came into my mind was this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, only from an organizational standpoint. And the idea is that organizations, like people, have a hierarchy of needs. And at the very bottom of the pyramid are things like, the structure of the organization. Is the structure of the organization supporting its people? Are we designing a humanistic culture? Do we have people in leadership roles who are really quality and transformational? Do we have a purpose beyond profit? Is there trust, connection, and support? And so if you picture an organization as a pyramid, kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very top of the pyramid, the thing that sits there like the little cherry on top is well-being programs and resources, meaning the formal programs and services that an organization offers that are designed to help people improve their individual well-being. They're really important, but they are actually the least important thing on the pyramid, or it's the thing that people can't really access. People can't fulfill their potential. The organization can't fulfill its potential just by focusing on well-being programs and resources. We have to focus on those more systemic needs, those more primary needs on the organization's hierarchy of needs. And so when we talk about helping organizations function at full capacity, we help them work with all of the needs on their organizational pyramid. But what we find is that most organizations need to work on things that are a little lower down. And then we can fine-tune well-being programs and resources later. Does that make sense at all or resonate?
It does. It does.
Yeah. Okay. That was maybe the last thing I wanted to add. Nat, anything you want to add?
One small thing, and we haven't mentioned it yet, which is why I want to bring it up. One of our values at Vital Solutions is people, and that we really believe in meeting companies and people where they are. So although we do come in and identify the gaps and where they could use help in creating an environment where people can function at full capacity, we also highlight where they're already doing well, because many of our clients have already invested a lot in different assessments and programs, and whether that's wellness programs or engagement surveys or other training and development, we also highlight to them, this is where you're already doing really well. Keep doing this. And then on top of where you're already doing well, this is how what you're already doing is going to complement what we're doing. We don't believe in coming in and having a clean slate and starting all over again. We really value what people have already invested in, and we incorporate that into our strategy. And so I think it's important that that we point out that we really meet people where they are and kind of pick up where they left off and move forward in a new, inspiring way.
That's a
great.
great point. Yep.
That's great. I feel like it's awesome talking to both of you because of the energy, and you could tell the passion that you have. And
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I feel like that's going to be so meaningful for, organizations to have people who can really dig in and figure out what the issues are and help resolve them and help people kind of move forward and grow. So
Thank you, Jonathan. I know we both feel really lucky because we do love the work we do, and we love working together and love working with our team. So thank you for giving us the chance to come on and talk about it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was really awesome. Thanks for both of you for joining us.
Thanks, Jonathan.
A pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye.